Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us for this evening's meeting. Just going to wait a minute or so here until our participant numbers level off, and then we'll get started. Okay, I think we're about there. So I'll just go ahead and get started here. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. And we're probably all pretty familiar with this Zoom meeting protocol at this point in time, but I'll go ahead and read through our Zoom meeting call logistics and ground rules. So you can turn your camera on and mute or unmute yourself through the control panel at the bottom of your screen. We're going to keep folks muted during the beginning of our program, but we'll unmute people when we open it up for questions and for feedback. Callers can unmute yourselves by pressing *6 on your phone. We ask that you raise your hand to ask a question, which you can access through the control panel at the bottom of the screen. You can also raise your hand by hovering over your face or name on the list of participants, and callers can raise their hand by dialing *9. Please be respectful of others. Mute your phone or line when you're not speaking. Be tough on issues and questions, but not people or organizations. Certainly, please don't make any personal attacks, insults, or threats. Listen, speak, and act professionally, and allow for a balance of speaking time so that we can have everybody participate. If you have any technical issues during the call, you can use the chat button, and we will help you through those. And please don't use the chat for questions or comments because we're going to take those live after the presentation. Thank you. So welcome, everybody. We're here this evening as part of our 2023 North of Falcon process. And tonight, our focus is on Willapa Bay. We have handouts for tonight's meeting posted on our website, and staff will be referencing those materials as we move through the presentation. So here's our presentation overview and meeting agenda. We'll first talk about the meeting purpose and introduce our staff involved with North of Falcon in the Willapa Bay region. And then we'll review a little bit about the North of Falcon process and calendar, revisit the salmon forecasts that we went over earlier this month during our forecast meeting. And then we'll talk about our 2023 management objectives for the upcoming season. And finally, we'll present the NELF, which is a model of new abundances with last year's fisheries. Next slide, please. So our purpose tonight as part of the North of Falcon process is both to provide information and to hear your thoughts about the fisheries this year and discuss options that we'll want to consider as we're crafting potential seasons. So at the end of our presentation, we're going to take questions and comments about the fisheries, and we'll be especially interested in getting your input for continued fisheries modeling. Here we have our staff organization chart specific to Willapa Bay. Most of these people are here with us tonight. Again, my name is Marlene Wagner. I'm the South Coast Fishery Policy Lead. I work on the statewide salmon management team under Mark Baltzell, our statewide salmon and steelhead manager, and Kyle Addix, our intergovernmental salmon manager, and Barb McClellan, who has now joined us over on the intergovernmental team as the Willapa and Grays Harbor commercial and marine recreational biologist. In Region 6, James Losey is our regional fish program manager. Jody Pope is the Willapa Bay fish biologist, and Nick Van Buskirk is our new Willapa Bay area biologist. So what is North of Falcon? North of Falcon is the annual cooperative process to set salmon seasons in Washington waters. The name refers to waters north of Oregon's Cape Falcon, which marks the southern border of Washington's management of salmon stocks. And North of Falcon is just one component of a larger salmon setting process that also involves the state, tribal governments, federal regulators, other US states, and Canada. So what guides North of Falcon? It's basically an iterative process where fishery managers weigh many factors when developing salmon seasons, And these include Endangered Species Act constraints, commission policy, Pacific Salmon Treaty obligations, tribal co-management, and we review the extensive monitoring and evaluation of fisheries statewide. So here you can see the schedule of kind of regionally specific meetings for the North of Falcon season this year. So we're here tonight, March 21st, to go over the forecast and open a discussion about our fisheries in Willapa Bay. Next slide, please. Tomorrow night, March 22nd, we're going to have a similar meeting that will be Grays Harbor specific. On the 29th, we'll have a second North of Falcon meeting where we meet with co-managers and refine fisheries planning models. We'll meet with you again on March 30th to further discuss the preferred fishery options for this year before the final PFMC meeting. We'll get back with you on April 12th. We'll hold another public meeting to present the final fisheries packages for both Willapa Bay and Grays Harbor. So all the links on these two slides are clickable, but an entire schedule for all of North of Falcon is available at the link at the bottom of the slide. And if you follow that link, you can find materials for all the meetings, and you can also view recordings of any meetings that have taken place so far this year, in case you want to review it again or if you missed one. Next slide, please. So as part of fishery rulemaking, we adhere to the Administrative Procedure Act. And so this starts with we filed a CR 101 in January to start this rulemaking process. After a minimum of 45 days, and when we have tentative agreement on fisheries, we file a CR 102. We take written comments and hold a public hearing on those proposed rules. We make modifications to proposed rules based on comment received or errors identified in the CR 102. And from there, we respond to those in a concise explanatory statement and file a CR 103, which are effectively the rules for the upcoming season. And the director signs those, and then 31 days later, the season is officially set. But here in the middle, between the filing of the CR 102 or CR 101 and CR 102 is North of Falcon. So this is where all those meetings I just reviewed occur. And this is the time for us to really get extensive public feedback from you that goes into our season planning. At the PFMC meeting earlier this month, the Pacific Fishery Management Council set ocean alternatives for this year, and they're listed in this table for both Chinook and coho. So for Chinook, quotas are primarily driven by Columbia River stocks. Upriver stocks have had significant increases this year. Almost all Chinook fishing is closed in South of Falcon, though, so there is an increase in ocean fisheries, but we still have to maintain a 38% impact rate on lower Columbia River natural tules. Coho forecasts this year are similar to last year's, but down just slightly, and these options here reflect those quotas. Next slide, please. So here you can see that marine areas 1 through 4 annual ocean quotas from 2010 to 22. So black dots and black lines represent non-treaty quotas, and gray dots and gray lines represent treaty quotas with Chinook on the left and coho on the right. The take home here is that both state and tribal fisheries take fish in the ocean, and we do need to account for those when we are determining our terminal run fisheries. Next slide, please. Here again are our 2023 Willapa Bay forecasts. You saw these earlier in the month, but this year's forecast for Chinook is 2,833 natural origin fish, 27,488 hatchery fish. For coho, we have forecasted 42,663 fish and 110,955 hatchery fish. And for chum, we have 44,575 natural origin fish, 1,119 hatchery fish, for a total of 45,694 chum. So we're just going to show you a couple of figures of our Chinook, coho, and chum trends from 2010 to 2023, except you'll note that on each of these figures, the predicted value for this year is shown in a bigger blue dot. The run size is shown with gray lines and gray dots, and the escapement is shown in black lines and black dots. So here we have Chinook, and as you can see, we haven't met our escapement goals for natural origin Chinook for the Bay in several years, and we are seeing a small decrease in our forecasted abundance this year. Next slide, please. Okay, so here we're looking at natural origin coho. Again, we've got run size in gray and escapement in black. We have that bigger blue dot is our predicted forecast for this year. And we're looking really good on coho. So hoping to have a very good fishery this year for coho. Next slide, please. And now we're looking at chum. Again, we've got gray lines, our run size, black lines, our escapement. Our escapement goal there is shown in green, and the bigger blue dot is our predicted value for this year. So we are looking at a decrease in our abundance of chum this year. Next slide, please. So our 2023 management objectives are very similar to the last 2 years. So the Fish and Wildlife Commission adopted interim guidance on March 12th, 2021 for Willapa Bay. And this guidance is again going to be carried over to the 2023 season. So for Chinook, that means that we're going to actively manage not to exceed 20% natural origin Chinook, 20% natural origin Chinook impact rate for Naysel and Willapa rivers. We're going to suspend time and area restrictions for commercial fisheries south of the commercial area 2T. We're going to have flexibility to determine daily limits for recreational fisheries. So we're going to have daily limits for Chinook and coho, but a season length to really achieve a full, robust, and recreational priority for Chinook fishing. We'll also continue the development and implementation of test fisheries and in-season update models, and we'll continue to release hatchery production at their facility of origin. Continuing on with 2023 management objectives for coho. We're going to manage to achieve the aggregate spawner goal for natural origin coho. We're going to prioritize commercial fishing opportunities from September 16th through October 14th, and then provide recreational fishing opportunities. For chum, we'll also manage to achieve the aggregate spawner goal of 35,400 fish for naturally spawning chum, and then provide commercial fishing opportunities and provide recreational fishing opportunities. And so now I'm going to hand the stage over to our commercial and marine recreational biologist, Barbara McCullen, to lead you through this year's NELF. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Most of you on the phone probably know me, but for those of you who don't, my name is Barbara McCullen. I am one of the bios here for Willapa Bay. I'm going to walk you through this slide so that you understand what this means. So this slide is a summary of the modeled expected output for the NALF model run. The NALF, as Marlene mentioned, stands for the new abundances and last year's fisheries. So basically what that means is if we were to plan the exact same fishery as last year for both the commercial and the recreational fisheries for the upcoming salmon season, and use the new abundances that we have forecasted for the salmon seasons, these would be the results. So for this table at the top, on the left-hand side, you'll see it says Model A and it says NALF, which describes this particular model run. The next set of columns explains the management objectives for our 2023 Willapa season. And we were directed to follow these management objectives from the Fish and Wildlife Commission, as Marlene mentioned earlier. For Chinook, we are to actively manage not to exceed that 20% on natural origin Chinook harvest rates on both Willapa and Naysel rivers separately. For coho, we're to achieve the natural origin spawner escapement goal. And for chum, we've been directed to achieve the spawner escapement goal for naturally spawning chum. So as you move over to the right, you'll see the headers there that say Chinook impact rate. So the rest of this table are the actual outcome of the model run itself. So, excuse me. As you can see, the expected natural origin Chinook impact rates for both Willapa and Naysel rivers are below the 20% that is required to be met for Chinook. For chum, I've got in here 26.1 is expected impact rate for chum based on the fisheries that we have currently scheduled in this model run. For the next set of columns, we're looking at escapements, the expected escapements. So each salmon have a different spawner goal. So for Chinook, the natural origin escapement goal is 4353. And in Willapa Bay, and the natural origin Chinook escapement is expected to be just over 2400, which is obviously below the 4353. For coho, the natural origin goal is 13,600 for Willapa Bay, and the natural origin coho escapement is expected to be just over 22,000, which is obviously over the 13.6. For chum, the spawner escapement goal is 35,400, and the total naturally spawning escapement expected is almost 34,000. So we're just under that goal. So the two red values are the ones not meeting the objective, and the green value is the one that does meet the objective. So for this next sort of 8 set of columns here, this has to do with policy priorities and allocation. So moving on to these columns, our Willapa management policy states that the priority for Chinook is to go to the recreational sector, and the priority for coho is to go to the commercial sector. So with that in mind, these are the results of the expected harvest for each sector in the NALF model run. So for Chinook, the expected harvest for the recreational sector, which is both the marine and the freshwater combined, is about 4,200, while the commercial sector is expected to be almost 3,200. Keep in mind that for Chinook, we've had a marked selective fishery for Chinook since 2010 due to low natural returns, and that is expected for 2023 as well. So the data that you see here, the 4,200 and 3,200, are the results of a hatchery retention only fishery. That is different than the coho fishery. So when you look at the allocation as well over the next set of columns, you'll see that that split of the 4,200 and the 3,200 equates to 57% to the rec fishery and 43% to the commercial fishery. So for the coho expected harvest, the recreational sector, both marine and freshwater combined, is expected to harvest about 6,500, where the commercial is expected to harvest almost 45,000. That split is almost 13% to the recreational fishery and 87% to the commercial fishery. So in this model run, the commercial fishery, the maximum number of days the commercial fishery has scheduled is 35, and that is the same as last year, which is what this model run is. So moving down to the next table, this is actually a fishery description of what that fishery is modeled as. So, sorry. The marine recreational fishery would be a 6 fish daily limit with 2 adults starting August 1st. All of these fisheries would be marked selective for Chinook, meaning that they would have to release unmarked Chinook. Last year for the marine area, they were able to keep both natural and hatchery in the 2 adult bag limit, and chum retention was allowed. For the freshwater recreational fishery, it's 6 fish, 2 adults. They would be marked selective for Chinook. However, they had 1 daily limit of natural coho with a 2 hatchery fish as well, and chum retention was allowed. For the commercial fishery, they use tangle nets in weeks 35 through 36 in the South, or 37 in the South Bay. And then in week 38, when everything else opened, they continued to use tangle nets. And then starting in week 39, they went to their small mesh gill net. And then they had some time scheduled in November for the first 3 weeks in various different areas, and they were also able to keep chum. So the last piece of this table shows the ex-vessel value of the commercial fleet if this schedule were to be used and planned, and if the returns of salmon materialize as the way we predicted them pre-season. So that value is 836,000. So I just wanted to mention that this particular slide was provided as a handout in an email that I sent out earlier today. It's also on the website under the North of Falcon timeline. So you can find it there as a separate document. I also shared both on the website and in the email a copy of the actual TAM model where this NALF model run was done. the TAM model provides the results that you'll see here, as well as a more detailed look at the weeks of the commercial fishery and the fishery descriptions for each river system in Willapa Bay with recreational salmon fisheries. So if you're interested in seeing that, check online or check the email. If you're on our distribution list, you would have received that. So I will turn this back to Marlene and she can finish out the last slide, I believe.
Thank you, Barb. So here we are at the end of our kind of official presentation. And we'd like to open the floor to the public for any questions or comments, fishery suggestions. So you can raise your hand to ask a question. You can access that through the control panel again at the bottom of the screen. You can also raise your hand by hovering over your face or name on the list of participants. If you're calling in, you can raise your hand by dialing *9. And callers, you can unmute yourself also by pressing *6.
Okay, Marlene, it looks like we have a hand up from Steve. Steve, go ahead. Steve, you can go ahead and unmute. Okay, I think Steve's having a little bit of tech issues unmuting. If you're on a phone, *6 might help you out. And that looks like the only hand we have for right now. So just a reminder for those, it looks like there's a few on the phone. Oh, there we go. And it looks like we have a hand up from a caller ending in 793. Go ahead.
Hello,
Hi, we can hear you.
this is Andy. Hey, so correct me if I'm wrong, but the last couple of years with your chum predictions, you have been using some kind of climate factor. So I would like to know how the climate factor change in the model has worked versus just using the model compared to the return.
Hey, this is James here. What you're asking for is forecast performance, and so it's a good question. This is Andy, right? Is that what I heard?
Correct.
Yeah. Hey, Andy. Good to see you here. So we had help from the science division this year to update that forecast method. So to look at model performance, I think we should chat offline and maybe even get Mickey in on the conversation. And then it seems like it'd be helpful for this larger group to see this too. So maybe at our next meeting, public meeting, we can share that information with some of that forecast performance data. What do you think of that? And I can tell you what I know about the forecasting method. There's a variety of environmental covariance, a variety of methods tested. The model that performs the best was used this year. It includes variables like sea surface temperature and larger basin scale ocean indices. And what it's telling us overall is that productivity is decreasing in the ocean for chum. And so that's what you're seeing in the forecast this year. That doesn't answer your question. How well did it perform last year, this new technique? So let's get you that information when we have it.
Yeah, no, that sounds good. I mean, it just seems like your prediction last year was, in the last 2 years, has been off by drastic measures. So I was just wondering what's changed. And I was just curious if you took the climate change out factor, how well the model performed compared to the actual return. So we're going to do that next meeting. I think that would be some good information to have.
Yeah, I'll reach out directly to you. But I can say a model that does not include the climate variables was tested against these for performance. And so the model that we're choosing this year, that choice was based on its model performance. So we know that the environmental variables do strengthen it, but let's show you specifically how that works. So I'll reach out to you, Andy, and then we'll provide some information on that in the next meeting.
Okay, it
Thanks.
looks like we have a hand from Larry. Larry, go ahead.
Hi, thanks. My name's Larry. Prior, I think kind of interjecting myself. I'm a recreational Willapa Bay fisherman. I like fishing out of Willapa Bay, or at least I used to. But I'm relatively new to this particular process. My questions, I looked at your predictions here for Chinook. I don't know, is the right question, how's your formula? How do you do your return predictions here for Chinook? It looks like your coho is going to be pretty close here. You know, I don't know enough about chum. I happen to be working on some SARs here lately for the bay and for hatcheries. I'm here for Willapa Bay. So how did you get to that number of too many pieces of paper to get to what you're predicting for return this year? 27,488 hatchery fish. And
Thanks, Larry. I'm gonna go ahead and punt your question to Jody, who does that analytical work here.
and then, am I still on?
Yes, sir.
And then, you know what? Again, I'm not sure how your process is. And then what happens if it's off? High or low? I could tell you why here in a second, but
Thanks, Larry, for the question. Similar to James's kind of explanation with the chum, there's a lot of different components that go into our forecasts. And with the Chinook, we look at different modeling techniques such as climate variables. We look at density dependence, we look at sibling relationships. And so we take a combination of all of those and see which model is performing the best and has the best fit with those. And those are really how we describe and get our forecasts moving forward. So this particular year, we used a sibling-based relationship with our natural origin Chinook. And for our hatcheries, we use density dependence relationships. And again, these are methods that I'd be happy to show you through there, like you just mentioned, many spreadsheets that go into these. So I'd be happy to set up some time and walk you through my methods that I use for determining these different forecasts, if that would be helpful, but definitely something that is maybe too time consuming over a Zoom call.
am I still on?
You are.
Can I make a comment here real quick? So I wanted to ask, you know, I'm not real sure what the goal here is of the south of, you know, how it affects particularly me, recreational fisheries seasons here. What happens if your 27, for your hatchery, 27,488 is off? Is either way too high or too low, or, you know, if it's on. I mean, are you setting seasons to that?
Yeah, that's a good question, and maybe James would have more to add to this, but I would say, you know, if every biologist that forecasts fisheries nailed it right on the number, we probably wouldn't be biologists anymore. We'd probably be describing something else bigger than that. So there is a lot of uncertainty that goes into some of our forecasts, and we do the best that we can because we're using trends over time. And so, you know, if we're a little off, that happens some years. And if we're a little under or over, that's just a part of the uncertainty that we face every year. Environmental conditions play into this a lot. And sometimes we can't predict what's happening in the ocean, and those changes happen rapidly sometimes. And so, you know, it's a great question. Sometimes we're over and sometimes we're not. So I hope that helps answer. And James, if you have any more to add to that.
And the reason I'm asking before I start, you know, I'll say the information I'm putting together, because I'm going to come back and follow up here. But that, you know, I've done some SARs, some historical SARs here and you know, the rest of the world works on SARs here towards the bay, you know, for the 3 hatcheries. I can give you that some historical SARs, and then plus harvest. Escapement to the hatcheries plus harvest. You know, last year your total bay hatchery plus harvest was only a 0.00263. Your
Hey,
forecast,
Larry. Hey, Larry.
hey Kelly, your
Larry.
forecast model is 0.047,
Hey, Larry.
which is twice as much. The
Larry,
reason
this
I'm
is Kelly.
asking-
Larry, this is
Yeah.
Kelly Cunningham.
Hi, Kelly.
How you doing? Hey, been a few years since we spoke. Just want to let you know we're in receipt of the letter you sent to the commission. We're going to prepare a response. This really isn't the time and place to talk about smolt to adult survival. We're here to talk about the season setting process,
Sure.
forecasts, and what we're looking at in terms of possibilities for seasons moving forward, both rec and commercial. So
Sure
I'm gonna
thing.
have
I understand
gonna-
that.
excuse me, I'm talking. I'm gonna have Eric Kinney reach out to you and talk to you about SARs. And with that, we need to move on.
Okay, I don't want to get into the whole discussion, but the question is about, in the seasons, are the hatchery, if we're plus or minus, I don't know your process. That's why I'm asking. I'm not trying to say, I'm right or I'm wrong, but, I almost don't want to comment on, but that's why I'm trying to, is this is setting seasons, and try to learn here a bit about things.
Yeah, appreciate that. And we're happy to schedule some time with you to maybe square you away and educate you a little bit on the season setting process. But really, this isn't the forum for that. We can schedule some time with you to bring you up to speed, but we're really trying to get some feedback from folks about the proposals we're putting forward.
Okay, great. And I know you fish out there, and others fish out there too, and we want to see a successful fishery.
Thank you, Larry. We're gonna try again with Steve. Steve, if you want to go ahead, you should be able to unmute. *6 on the phone. And if you can't, Steve, you might need to leave the meeting and call back in. Sometimes it takes a second for our technology doesn't sync up right the first time. I think we're going to go to Lance. Lance, go ahead.
There we go. Did I unmute?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. So first thing, as we go through this stuff, I'm a little bit disappointed in that people that get on here, we have to realize that when the state does this job, it's not an exact job. And I think that when we throw these numbers out of predictions or what we think are going to come back in April, or I guess we're doing it in March. So we're so far from having any idea of what it's going to be. We're throwing a guesstimate out there, and people get so hung up on, oh, you said that this is what it was in April. I really wish the state would step into these meetings and say, hey, and maybe you, in your mind, you think you do, but this is not, and I know you said it's not an exact science, like Jody, you said, it's not. If we could guesstimate this thing so close, you're better off picking lottery tickets than what we're doing. So people get so hung up in this thing that, oh, you said it was going to be this, or you said it was going to be that. In the end of all that, my issue with it is adaptive management. What we put on a piece of paper today for the commercial fishery is rarely what the commercial fishery ends up. I'm sure in the last 8 years, we can go back through the fishery and it doesn't end up being the days that we put down. It really doesn't make any difference what days we put on here today. It's what returns or what we see happening in the fishery. My only problem is the word adaptive management has only gone one way. And we had an opportunity last year to change some of our fishery, to harvest some excess hatchery fish. And I feel like the state runs so scared that because they said the commercial fishery was going to catch this in April, and it comes out something different, that somebody's going to be breathing down their neck. There's years where we don't catch what we're supposed to catch. There's years when we're going to catch more than we're supposed to catch. People have to get beyond this and just realize that this guesstimate we're making today and next week and all the way through north of Falcon is a guesstimate. We really have no idea. We can throw a climate factor in on dogs. It's a guesstimate. We've been off the last 2 years so far that we would never keep running with this climate factor this year if it was that far off in the other direction. So somewhere we've got to get to the point of management. And by that, I mean adaptive management to what we see returning when these fish come back in August and September. And we have to stop holding on so much to this is what you said in April. So that will be my comment. My honest feeling is you do the best job that you can at figuring out how many fish we had at the end of the year. But honestly, none of you are right. And you all know you're wrong because it's impossible for you to be right. You take a guesstimate at how many dogs came back to a creek that's 6 feet over its bank. And what we have to deal with is an impossibility, but we hang our hat on it and we get so upset about numbers and things that we talk about here. It's got to come to an end. We set the season, we go fishing, and then we figure it out as we're fishing. And people have to realize that sometimes the state's going to be a little bit off one way or a little bit off the other way. This last year and the year before, we were way off on dogs and we were way off on coho that we should have harvested. But the state is so afraid to do anything about it. And we waste these fish that should have been harvested for people to eat, for people to make money on, for our communities to thrive. And instead, we bonk them in the head and throw them in a tote and send them to a dog food place. And it's very sad. That's my rant for today.
Thank you, Lance. Marlene, do you have something to say to that?
I was gonna thank him for his comment.
Okay, perfect. I saw you pop on. Okay, and next I see Steve, you've left and rejoined. Let's see if we can get your mic synced up here. Go ahead, dial *6 to unmute maybe. You also might need to find a mute. If you're on an app, you might need to push an unmute button. I'm going to try something else really quick, Steve. I'm going to see if I can unmute you myself this way. Can you unmute now? Sometimes if you have an older version, you have to be promoted. Darn it. I'm sorry, Steve. I'm not sure why we can't get you unmuted tonight. There's no other hands at the moment. And I see another one pop up. Okay, Greg, go ahead.
Hello, you get me?
Yep, we can hear you.
I'm going to talk fishery here. Just by, I think Andy and Lance touched on the dog dilemma that we're in as far as the forecast and actual. But with that being said, I think running this, I think it's a pretty easy fix. We're not missing the dogs by that much on this fishery model. But what I would like to see is maybe, you know, if you're going to run with this model, take a day away, and I'm sure you'll hit your number. But I would like to see more effort or more coho effort on the commercial fishery. You know, it's ridiculous that we're surplusing all these fish. There's a very, you know, there's a robust sport fishery above us. It's a great fishery. So with these numbers like this, you know, since today, technically, I hate using the word priority, but since they are, that these windows, these fish windows that we got need to be closed a little bit. It's too much. Where, you know, you get there's just too much surplus getting by us. And I think with our fleet, the way it's pared down even more now, we need to recognize that. So that's what I'd like to see. So hopefully we get some more days in there. Either more days or more hours in the day in our fishery day. What we've kind of fighting for anyway too, as well, is we have to be able to have the time to harvest these fish. Thanks.
Great, thanks for your comment.
And that was the last hand for right now. So anybody else, if you're on the phone, *9 to raise your hand. Looks like we have one call in that I can see for sure. Everybody else, it's the bottom of your screen. And I see we have a phone number ending in 932. Go ahead.
This is Ross.
Hi, we can hear you.
Good. Question and a comment. The question is, when the commission gives you a 20% mortality rate on Chinook, does that overcome the need to increase Chinook escapement? That's the question, and I have a comment.
Hi, Ross, Marlene here. I'm not sure I understand totally your question. So we have a 20% impact rate on Chinook in Willapa and Nassau River. But maybe if you repeat your question or state it a little differently, please.
Okay, the question is that you're killing about 14% a year and not gaining on escapement. And so when they give you up to 20%, does that overcome the need in the policy to show progress on Chinook escapement?
Okay, I think I see where you're getting to. So couple things. The impact rates are based on an AHA model that was completed during policy review, which was intended to achieve I guess recovery might be the right word, maybe, of Chinook to escapement levels in 16 to 31 years, right? But what we have been doing a lot of discussing over the last 2 years about is that really we don't believe that we have appropriate escapement goals. So they're what we have to work with now, but we anticipate revisiting those and reanalyzing them. So I don't know if that.
Okay, so I take that as being that the escapement goals for Chinook are not considered that high of a priority. My comment is, when we take a look at your models, I picked one out, okay? The commercial nets are killing in one model, and the other one was pretty close. 296 wild Chinook are being killed by the nets. And the recreationals are killing 62. And so, as they would say with a New England accent, you can't get there from here, okay? You're never going to make it without more impacts by wrecks and way fewer by commercials. And after all these years, you're not on a curve to meet escapement. And I think I heard you banking on the fact that we're going to lower the escapement goals.
Well, I didn't say we were going to lower the escapement goals. The escapement goals are based on a habitat analysis that was done in 1985. And so we don't know everything yet, but we are confident that the habitat does not look the same as it did in 1985.
Okay, well, I find that interesting after tens of millions of dollars improving the habitat, that you're confident that it needs to be lowered. It should be raised by all the work. There was one project with the Nazelle, $1 million project, one project. And what you're saying is now we're confident that the escapement goals are not accurate. Well, for all the work we put into it and all the money, seems like, if anything, they should be going up. And I think that you're more than a little biased. But I think the only way you're going to meet any escapement goal is with less commercial mortality and a little bit more on recreational. And the season should reflect that. It's just not working out at all. And comment on the chum, you have a percentage of wild chum that's very high, and that's not my observation. In other words, when it isn't closed, I fish the chum below, fly fish chum below the mouth of Williams Creek in the Nema River, where we have a big chum run, and the hatchery has just increased it tremendously. And the chum are not doing what they used to do. They would pile up right below the mouth of Williams Creek and then run up Williams Creek. Okay. Now, a lot of them come pile up below the mouth of Williams Creek. They run about 100 feet up, turn around, and come back and then run up to the hatchery. And so come to the hatchery, and they push thousands. Last 2 years, they pushed thousands of hatchery chum back out into the river from the hatchery because there's such a surplus of hatchery fish. They go up that time of the year. The ladder is open. They go up the river and spawn on top of wild Chinook and coho. And so I think the hatchery crew and the modeling crew, you need to get together and coordinate a little bit better. But the other comment is we don't need to be shutting down the North Nema River to quote save coho in October. There aren't any coho in there in October. The North Nema is 99% wild coho, and they're not there in October. For many years before you started closing it, I fished it, and I caught about a half a coho per year while chum fishing in October. And you used to be able to keep them, but I never kept more than one because I never caught more than one. And now we're closing it to save coho, and there's just it makes no sense whatsoever. So those are my comments, and I just get a bias that these escapement goals for Chinook are. I'm smelling a bias that they're not really accurate. You're sure they're not, and so I don't seem to be worried about it. I think we should be.
Thank you, Mr. Barkhurst. We're anticipating being directed by the commission to review and update these escapement goals. And that has also been our staff recommendation. We're not prepared to say what the goals are or how we're going to achieve them at this point, because we're not there yet. So what we're working with it is what we have, which again is an analysis on habitat that was done in 1985. And if you send me an email, I'll send you that paper. It's called a Bricks memo, and I'll send that along to you.
Well, you sound way too comfortable in when a little over half the escapement goal crosses the bar, and you're willing to apply a 14 to 20% mortality rate on that. You seem way too comfortable for a goal that has not been adjusted. And some of our observation, that's not the way it looks. Not when you spend millions of dollars improving the habitat. For what? Thank you.
I appreciate your comments. Thank you.
And our next hand is from Andy. Andy, go ahead.
Hello, this is Andy again.
We can hear you.
Okay. One recommendation I might make on the commercial season, just you can jot it down. Maybe get some earlier days when the hatchery Chinooks that are supposed to be harvested might be a little more present. So I don't know what stat weeks those are, but say the 15th to the 20th or the 20th to the 25th. And maybe reduce some days from like the 1st to the 7th, whatever, however the stat weeks work. When the hatchery fish have already went by. I don't know how it's going to fit the model, but I would like to see how something like that would flush out. That's all I got.
Sorry, I was on mute. Thanks, Andy. And we've got it noted. Appreciate it.
And I'm going to try Steve again really quick. Steve, Can you try to unmute again? I'm gonna send a prompt. See if it will let you unmute. I did send you a phone number in the chat that you can try calling. The webinar ID is in there, and also a passcode in case you need it. You can call in and we can try that way. Maybe from a different cell phone or a different phone. And our next hand is from Lance. Lance, go ahead.
I can only imagine that Steve is probably throwing stuff through his house now. This is about the 10th time this has happened and he can't get on. I don't know why. Sorry, Steve. So as Andy was, we start talking about season setting stuff, and I assume we got another meeting coming up. I haven't looked at our schedule really, but to model some of this stuff. But and Greg touched on it a little bit earlier that as we look at the 50-some thousand surplus coho that we had, I would like to see us, when we get into the heart of coho season, maybe that September 15th through the 1st or something like that, that we look at not having, as many windows. I know last year, I think we increased from, that was the big deal. We had to go from 4 days and leave 3 days to go through, and we went to 5 days. We still had, that early segment of coho that comes through are mostly hatchery coho. They're, showing up in huge surpluses. I would like to see us try to model 6 days or something in there, and keep working on that. We got a bigger prediction than we had even a run last year, I believe, looking at it. It's really, really tough for us. And I know everybody thinks when you throw a net out, you catch everything that's in the water, but coho are very hard for us to catch. And when they get the right day, the right rain, the right tides, they go by us so fast and they're at the hatchery in 2 days that, there's never going to be a time that we can stop them. If there's a large run, you're going to have, all the coho you can possibly catch in that river, in all of the rivers. I mean, so if there's a little run, we won't be there. We can't afford to do this on no coho. But with the prediction we've got and the situation we got this year, I would like to see us model for at least in that 2-week period of September 15th through October 1st, 5th, something like that, where it is basically a coho fishery for us. More days in there if we can. When you look at, Barbara pulled up X vessel value, we wasted more than we caught last year. And I know 800,000 and some dollars or $1 million doesn't seem like any money to anybody anymore. What we spend to go buy groceries every day, it seems like, but it means a lot to this area. It means a lot to the people that buy these fish, process these fish, ship them out. So I want to see us try to utilize, and if God forbid the run doesn't come like you said, we're fine with stepping away from it. We will work with the state day to day, hour to hour to make the fishery run so that things get done right. We would have stepped away last year on the Chinooks. We were worried. We made phone calls and said, hey, we will step away from a day. So we're not going to sit here and try to kill the last coho, because trust me, when it gets down to catching 20 a day, we're just throwing money out of our pocket. So we're not going to be there doing it. But if there's an abundance of coho, we need to try to harvest them so the hatchery doesn't have to go through and surplus them, because the next step you guys are going to hear is we're going to cut production. It doesn't matter whether it's a coho or a Chinook or a dog. If the hatchery has got to take truckloads, semi-loads of fish out of there, it's not going to be good for any of us in the long haul. So when we have these situations where they show up, we've got to work together. We've got to change days. We've got to be able to figure this out so we can harvest a fish that we're trying to guesstimate on today. Thank you. Hope you get on, Steve.
Thank you, Lance.
And our next hand is from Greg. Greg, go ahead.
Greg, Andy Lance, Greg.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, well, good luck, Steve. But I think it's very important to, in this conversation on days, especially when it comes to our coho days, is it's very important to, even when we went to 5 days a week, that's 5 12-hour days. The reality is it's 2.5 days a week. So you have, as far as hour wise, there's plenty of escape window. I mean, this whole a window, to me during this peak of this hatchery run is ridiculous. It needs to, because there's plenty of fish that always get by. And we've got to cut these surpluses down. And if you're not, willing to give us days, give us more hours on the days that we have. That's what we're, we just need time to catch them when they're there. It doesn't do a bit of good when, like Lance said, when we get weather and they're gone, then these days just, that it's worthless. But so anyway, I just like to, it seems like we always talk about days, the days we used to talk about were 24-hour days. Now they're 12-hour days. So, so there's plenty of windows for fish to get by during the week, at what we're doing. So, we hope you guys have a little bit of, appetite to talk about that, because it seems like to me when we've gone to these 12-hour days that it's no way, can't go back. And I think that's ridiculous because of, when you're predicting these kind of fish. I mean, we've got to get at some of these surpluses. So thanks.
Thank you for your comments, Greg.
And next we have a hand from Keith. Keith, go ahead.
Yeah, last year I asked for an accounting of the surplus fish. It came back to the hatcheries. By my figures, it looks like 55–60% of the run winds up in the surplus totes. And if anybody's interested, look for a study that was done in 2010 regarding surplus fish. It's considered a resource by the state of Washington. And by other terms, that means fish farming. What I'd ask for is a column in your data here that would say surplus. And where does that surplus go? My understanding is some of it goes to tribes, some goes to prisons, some goes for sale to food processors, and some winds up in the general fund. As long as we're breaking down the commercials and the sports fishermen, let's break down the surplus. And you'll find that we beat each other up here as commercials and sports. And we look away from the ball, which is they're trying to get plenty of surplus fish back, of which a few are needed for eggs, but the majority is not. And so I don't see that data that I thought was going to be here this year. That's it. Thanks.
Thank you, Keith.
And that was our last hand for right now. So another call for anybody that has a question or comment. It looks like Keith has his hand back up. Keith, go ahead. Is that an accidental hand, Keith? I think so.
Okay, there.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, I've had an interest in the recovery of natural fish. this whole process seems to be revolving around recovery of natural fish. And I'd like to know, is there any effort being made regarding the genetic improvement that's supposed to be occurring because of all of this process? And I got a further comment after I get an answer on that.
Keith, I'm not exactly sure what you mean by that, but we have done some work this year. And these presentations are recorded. You can watch them. The fish in Willapa Bay have their own sort of genetic signature, right? So they are adapted to those local streams. Does that answer your question?
Well, maybe I misunderstand this whole thing. I thought we're supposed to be improving the genetics of the wild fish, quote, wild, and reducing the genetics of the hatchery fish. And as I understand it, that can be determined by genome or whatever you call it, genetics. Is that true or not?
We strive to maintain populations that are locally adapted to the Willapa Bay system.
So why do we put natural fish above weirs, such as in the nacelle? I have very serious doubts that we could ever improve the genetics on the Willapa because there's too many downstream possibilities for spawning. But the nacelle has a weir and it's close to the mouth. I would assume that a lot of the natural fish going back to the nacelle and turned upstream could be improving genetics. Maybe
Hey,
go
Keith,
ahead.
I'm going to jump in here. This is James. I supervise the hatchery operations out here in Willapa Bay and in the rest of the coast. I'm happy to chat with you more. I think we're a little bit confused on what you mean by the health or the genetics, like improving the genetics. But since we're here focused on fishery management and designing fisheries for this season, I'm a little bit worried digging in any deeper on this conversation here, because I know that's not what most people are here for. So I'd like you to shoot me an email if you can. I'll put my contact information in the chat and we can keep this conversation going.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Keith.
And that was our last hand for the time being.
Hey, Leah.
Yeah, Kelly, do you have something to say?
Yeah, thank you. I do. So been trying to reach out to Mr. Gacky. He put a comment in the chat and asked me to read it out loud. So I'm going to do that and maybe take a stab at addressing it and ask maybe Kyle or Mark to follow up with their perspectives as well. So Steve's comment was verbatim here. My problem tonight is the rationale for holding public meetings in person. While I understand the remote access for staff is a cost savings, but this is a public meeting. So maybe I'll take a stab at responding to that, Steve. I appreciate the perspective, but I also appreciate the fact that there are multiple perspectives around how we conduct public meetings. And we've learned a lot over the course of the last 3 years. We've had hundreds of comments from folks appreciating the fact that we do these remotely. It allows them to engage, in conversations around fisheries where, they may not live nearby, right? So folks from other areas who fish Willapa and Columbia River and Puget Sound who don't live nearby have an opportunity to have their voices heard. That said, I understand the frustration. It's a pretty big change from where we've been historically, where our public meetings were all in person. That said, Kyle Addix, who's on this call, our intergovernmental ocean, or excuse me, our intergovernmental salmon manager and I were just in a public meeting down in Ridgefield talking about Columbia River fisheries that was hybrid. So I don't want to downplay your concern. I think there's always opportunity for us to improve, but I think this remote option for folks who aren't able to participate in person is going to be part of our path moving forward. But I think we also need to consider that hybrid approach where we're also in person. So I appreciate your concern. I appreciate your question. And as always, Steve, you know how to get a hold of me. You and I have been in close contact here for quite a while, and I'm happy to chat with you further on this.
Hey, Kelly, before Leah takes the next question, I just had a quick note here. Hey,
Okay.
Leah, I can't seem to get in the chat efficiently. Would you mind putting in the chat my email address so folks know questions associated with hatchery operations? They can shoot me an email.
Yeah, I will put your email in the chat right now.
The other thing I wanted to mention, thanks, Leah. We're going to focus on, of course, fisheries, but Andy had a good question about chum forecast performance. I've been chatting with Mickey here on the side, and I just want to say really briefly here that traditionally our models over the last decade have had about a 20 to 30% error. So that's that frustration with predicting a run when you're about 20 to 30% off. That's pretty tricky. This new tool that Mickey's been using that incorporates a variety of variables and weighs a bunch of different forecasting tools for the last 3 years performs in the range of 12 to 16%. So it's improving, and each year we apply it, it improves a little bit more. So let folks know that forecasting work's improving. We're excited about that. So thanks. That's what I got. Hopefully that helped, Andy. Back to fisheries planning.
Okay, I dropped your email address in the chat for everyone. And there's no hands at the moment, so any last comments or questions from anybody? If you're on the phone, *9 to raise your hand. There's a raise hand function at the bottom of your screen. Also, there may be a emotions tab with a smiley face. And I see a hand up from caller ending in 932. Go ahead.
Hi, this is Ross. I'd like to address the surplus coho problem. It is a problem. And I went to the presentation on the looking at $16 million for a new and better weir at Mayselle. But I have a thought. First off, the last 2 years is 18,000 and 9,000 early coho surplus at the Mayselle hatchery. And the river is closed to sport fishing for that time till October 15th. Okay. Also, they'll never make PHOS, and they say this even with a new weir, because the hatchery and the wild Chinook spawn below it. And so, and of course, it's closed for miles below that down to the highway to sport fishing, who have much lower impact rate. And so my suggestion is we have a successful thing going on in the NEMA on a small scale, and that is a senior citizens hole below the Mayselle hatchery, easy to monitor if you put it within sight of the hatchery there. And we could pull out, senior citizens could pull out hatchery Chinook and hatchery coho and improve PHOS considerably in the case of the hatchery Chinook, and also improve this ridiculous surplus of early coho. And I understand that the nets can't get in them because they have to avoid the Chinook when the early coho are coming up. And so there are solutions, but they involve thinking out of the same old box. And we have that going in the NEMA on a smaller scale. And the definition of seniors there was 70 years. And I think that's probably about right, but we really need to do some different things. We can't do the same thing and expect different results. And then there's a suggestion that I have that would help out with that. Interested in the department's comments or thoughts?
Yeah, just let you know, message received. Thanks for that. Appreciate the comment.
Our next hand is from Lance. Lance, go ahead.
Okay, I've got you, James. When you said that, my hair stood up, but on the dog percentage, and I might be completely whacked, and sometimes I am, but when I look at the numbers of the last 2 years, at least, and I don't have the third in front of me, but last year we predicted 43,000, ended up with 93,000 total run. Year before we ended up low 40s, ended up with 85,000 total run of dogs. And I went to NACL. My math probably isn't perfect, but those predictions seem to be, and I believe the year before was maybe not as egregious, but it was very large. So somewhere, and we don't have to have the conversation. I'm just throwing it at you to look at. It's an issue that we have in our fishery. That there's a lot of dogs that probably should be harvested, and like I said, if I was going to guesstimate, I would tell you that the numbers, one way or the other, are probably 10-15% off, where it was 93 or 103 or 83,000 fish. So it is a guesstimate and it is a deal, but it doesn't seem like 12 or 15%. But we can have that conversation later. We don't have to do it tonight, but it's something that we would like to dig into with you guys, and it doesn't have to pick up this whole meeting tonight. So thank you.
Hey, yeah, that's great. I don't want to take up the full meeting. This is a topic I like talking about, so I'm going to hold back a little, but I do want to say, Lance, you comparing your math with mine and not getting the same answer makes sense. You're not wrong. So the forecasting tool we're using to predict runs next year for chum, this is a new tool, right? It's brand new. When we talk about how it performs last year and the year before that, it's because we have all of those same tools to predict last year's run, like run a different forecast and see if it would have done better. So we call that hindcasting. I think you know this. So when we use the current model and we hindcast those past runs, we can see if it does better or worse than what we actually used. So what we're seeing is, had we used it last year, we didn't have it, we couldn't have used it. But if we hindcast, we see that we get in that 12 to 15 to 16% range. So it performs much better than the tool we used last year or the year before. So that's a little bit complex. I get why that's challenging. The other thing, so you're right, is my point. We're more confident in this model though. The other thing I want to mention, Lance, while you're on the line, you mentioned that we need to work together for these commercial fisheries. So I don't want to step on Marlene and Barb's toes here, but I think we'd all agree we do work pretty well together in season. We have a couple of these species that we have in-season update tools that allow these phone conversations and meetings to understand how is the data we collect comparing with what we predicted, pre-season. So we need to keep strengthening those. We have work to do for Chinook to actually come up with an in-season update tool so we can keep this relationship and maximize harvest and, meeting management objectives. So I'm kind of nodding my head to the things you're saying and just appreciate it. So thanks.
I don't know if am I still on there? Oh,
you are.
Okay. So in that, and I know Chad's hiding somewhere in the back room on this thing somewhere, but
Lance, I don't see him on here.
We have
so
these
I don't think he
conversations,
is.
Okay, I didn't have a list of people. Sorry, Chad. I can burn on him then. Perfect. I think you're exactly right. On the Chinooks, when we do an update thing, they're a spread out fishery. We're looking at it from August 15th to September. We've got a month. Dog salmon for us in our fishery is a blink. I mean, it truly is an October 15th to November 1st, and it's done. It's over for us. For as far as there may be fish still showing up in the river. There may be some fish show up October 1st. You might get 3 male dogs. Big woo. But we had this conversation last year. I talked with Chad quite a bit about last year somewhere, and we can do run update on Chinook and Coho. It's something that we can work with, and but somewhere we have to come up with a way other than walking a stream on November 5th at looking at our dog run, because it happens way too fast. And I suggested some sort of a test fishery. I don't know what that is or how we do it, but somewhere we have to start getting information where we can correlate, okay, there was this many dogs on this date in the test fishery, whether it's 1 guy, 10 guys, 20 guys, whatever it is, we need to sit down and figure out so we can, we'll never be able to harvest the dogs or not harvest the dogs if we shouldn't, when we look at our only tool really is stream surveys. By the time you do your stream survey, it's over for us. And it really is, it doesn't seem like a fish that anybody wants to eat, but we actually make some money off of dogs if we can go get some volume. It actually helps our people get by. So it is a viable fish, as ugly as they are, for us to make some money at it. So it's something I would like to, and I don't know how we do it. Nobody has the answer yet, but my suggestion is to figure out a way to, if we're not fishing, if we have to close the coho fishery on October 10th, that we don't just say, let's look at it November 5th, because it doesn't work. Somehow we've got to come up with a way to put a number or an idea of what the run looks like in season. We have this part of it, we can guess, and you can, like you're saying, you can throw out whatever thing you want, and you can hindcast, or I call that 2020. I hit that pretty good. Usually on the lottery numbers, I hit it every time. But it's getting it in season, not now, not north of Falcon, but day to day, hour to hour. And that's the only way we're going to get dogs is literally on a daily basis.
Thanks, Lance.
Thank you.
Okay, and we have Ross with his hand up again. Ross, go ahead.
Yes, I think that the recreational fisheries, and I know I could help a lot out with the chum salmon. I've fished them for 30 years in the North Nema, and he's right. You know, October 15th is when you start getting numbers into the river. In the river, the females show up end of October, first 4 or 5 days in November, and that's it. And so, in the case of the Nema, that's all that's there. Okay, there's no Chinook left in the lower river, and the wild coho aren't there yet. And it sounds like you're consulting with the netters in season, and if you would consult with some of the former advisors on the sport fishing side, we could help. And apparently you don't. In other words, when you got rid of advisors, you don't check with the people that live by the river and fish it. And if you would, you could get a lot more input. And I think you could take advantage of the chum situation. I think your percentages of wild ones are way off. We got so many hatchery chum coming up the North Nema, it's ridiculous.
Hey, Ross, I'm going to interrupt you here. So my email's in the chat. I think you got the numbers from a lot of people on this call. The idea that we don't communicate with sport anglers, I think it's just not accurate. So let's keep focusing on the fisheries planning and keep it positive. So,
yeah.
have
you ever consulted with me in season in the last few seasons?
Hey, Ross, thanks. I'm happy to chat with you anytime you want.
Who is it?
Appreciate your comments.
Who is this?
Hey, Ross, this is James. I'm really hoping that we can keep this focused on fisheries planning. Okay. So we'll, if you don't have a question or a comment on that, let's keep moving.
Roger.
Okay, and that looks like everyone for now. Marlene, it doesn't look like we have any more hands.
Thanks, Leah. And thank you everybody who joined us tonight and commented on with your fishery suggestions. We really appreciate that. And we really listen, and we're going to come back to you in a couple of weeks here, or I think it's 9 days. Yep, on the 30th with your suggestions modeled. and we can have another discussion. So again, that's gonna be March 30th. It's also a Zoom meeting, 6 to 8 p.m. And we really look forward to seeing you then. And it was a pleasure to have you here tonight. Thank you very much.